So within ASP.NET MVC, you need to think about the way that you construct your apps. And really, this can hold true for just about any application you build. You have to start with the real-world scenario and convert that to code in layers. So you start with, what are my nouns, what are my objects that I'm dealing with in real life? How do I then create classes that represent those objects? And then how do I go from code to actions or events, things that happen with the user, to then finally building that user interface. Probably in your C# class, you worked a little bit more the other way around, unless you took it with me. You probably started with building a form, your form did some stuff, and then you'd have to build some classes to do it. So I like to think from the bottom up, because the next layer below that is your database. So if you start thinking about what are my objects and how do they interact, your database design becomes easier, which then makes your class construction easier, and all of that drives your user experience. And then eventually you get to a point where your UI has to do something, you're trying to simplify things, and then you'll have to work your way back down. And it's kind of this up and down, but it's always better to start with what are the concrete things I'm dealing with. So in this case with the login, we'll go ahead and create a login class. Now, inside of the MVC concept, there is a special kind of class, which we'll talk more about next week, and you'll see its validity, called a view model. Okay, so the term model is basically the same term you would use for a class, for an object. I'm creating a model of something in real life. I'm creating a class that models something in real life, so they just use the term model. You can actually create another type of model, which is called a view model. And the purpose of a view model is to model something that exists in your view that may not be concrete to real life, like a login. You know, you don't actually have such a thing as a login outside the context of a computer, unless it's one of those, like, you know, kind of trying to get it done. Huh?
Secret doc.
Exactly. So, I mean, it kind of becomes a login, right? So, you're trying to model this. So, these view models are classes, but we give them specialized terms to help differentiate where in the stack they exist. So, I'm going to call this my login view model. So, that's the name of my class. So, it's a class like any other. I'm just noting or assigning it a specialized role, calling it a view model because it's there for the purpose of modeling my view, modeling my UI experience. So I heard things as we were going through. I heard username, password. I liked the one about keep me logged in or remember me. So those are all kind of those raw values that we need. Now there was a couple other things in here that we talked about. So maybe we'll say validate username. And we can make that a method. And this method will validate if the username is an email address. So wouldn't it be great if we could take those values out of those text boxes, pump them into this class, and then call that method. And that method has the logic of validating if that username is an email address. So the work that we would do, we encapsulate inside of this view model. That way we don't have to put it on the page, we don't have to put it in the controller, it all comes packaged together inside of this view model. So whether we take this view model and we throw it in a mobile app, or we throw it in a Windows app, or throw it in some other app, that logic all stays together. Then we can grab this class file and ship it wherever we want. And if we make it well enough and generic enough, then the next time you go build an app, you go, you know, I built a pretty good login view model. I'll just grab that class out of that project and put it in this one. So being able to reuse your own code is ideal. All right, so I've got 3 properties. Everybody remembers properties. They got the get and the set versus your fields are just type, variable name, semicolon. Let me actually type that out. So in this case, remember me with the get and the set is a property. Remember me too is considered a field. The primary difference is that with remember me too, it's just like any variable. Once I put a value in, I can take a value out, I can put whatever I want in there, and there's no validation occurring. There's no way for me to catch the value that's coming in and make sure that it's accurate. There's no way for me to customize the value that goes out. It's basically it's in and out. It's a bucket, just like any other variable. Properties, this is a shorthand for that property, but we can actually expand it out if we wanted. No, that's not what I wanted. So this way is fully expanded. So we can go in here, we have to declare a private variable and pair it with our public property. And the way that I would normally do that is something like that. And then we come down here and we do return remember me equals value. But we can add additional code in these curly bracket blocks. So this is just a review more than anything, or making you aware of the differences. You'll see me typically use the shorthand notation with just the get semicolon set semicolon, but we have exception cases where you want to put a full block of code in. And we'll talk about those as we run into them. But properties are what we want to stick with, because if at some point we need to change from the shorthand to the fully verbose version, we can do that on the back end and the rest of our code doesn't care. You go from using a field to a property, things can get a little funky depending on how you've got it implemented. All right, so that is essentially going to be our view model. That's our lowest layer, our class object. And don't confuse this with your controller. We haven't gotten there yet. We've just created a class that represents what we're going to do in terms of being able to allow a person to log in or authenticate. You'll see how this all flows together as we get further on.